Usually when we talk about getting a medical diagnosis, there's this profound expectation of precision.
Right, like it's supposed to be an exact science.
Exactly. It's almost like engineering. I mean, you fall, you break your arm, you go to the hospital, and the X-ray shows that stark, jagged white line.
And the doctor just points at the screen and says, well, there it is. That's the problem.
Yeah. It's a binary state.
The bone is broken or it isn't. You slap a cast on it, and you know roughly how long it takes to heal.
Right, and it's comforting. We desperately like things to be visible. Like, we want our problems to be easily categorized so we can just apply a known solution.
Human nature.
Totally. But then you step away from the human body and you look at the world of global economics and international energy supply.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole different animal.
And suddenly it feels like that X-ray machine is completely broken.
Just spitting out static.
Just static. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape right now that is incredibly murky and, honestly, a little bit terrifying.
More than a little bit.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are attempting to read those broken X-rays for you.
Good luck to us.
Seriously, we've got a massive stack of data on the table today, and we're synthesizing two highly urgent sources to help you understand this completely unprecedented global chaos that is currently unfolding.
Yeah, and the sources are dense.
Very dense. First, we have a recently translated, deeply technical geopolitical analysis produced by European energy experts.
Right.
And we're pairing that with a remarkably stark, almost brutal macroeconomic commentary from the financial sector.
Brutal is definitely the right word for that one.
It really is. So, our mission today, we need to figure out exactly what is happening to the global system, how it actually works, and most importantly, why it matters to you.
And we cannot overstate the scale of the shock we're trying to map out today.
No, we can't.
Just to give you a baseline sense of where we're starting,
Mm-hmm.
the head of the International Energy Agency, the IEA Fatih Birol, has officially gone on record about this.
What did he call it?
He called it the greatest disruption of oil supply in the history of the global oil market.
The greatest in history. Let that sink in for a second.
It's staggering.
We aren't talking about a minor market correction here.
No.
We aren't talking about a bad quarter. We're talking about a historic paradigm shift.
Absolutely.
But before we get into the actual mechanics of why the system is breaking down, I need to pause and establish some ground rules for today's deep dive.
This is important, yeah.
Because our source material today is diving headfirst into an active, incredibly chaotic global crisis, and it inherently touches on highly politically charged content.
You literally can't discuss it without touching on politics.
Right. Our sources are tracking the real-time decisions of figures like Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, Ayatollahs in Iran.
Plus, they're analyzing national policies, everything from Western green energy transitions to the UK's specific military actions in Eastern Europe.
Exactly. So I want to be unequivocally clear with you, the listener. Neither of us is endorsing any political viewpoints today.
None at all.
We aren't taking sides on these highly sensitive geopolitical issues. Our sole mission is to act as your translators.
We're just looking at the math and the physical realities.
Right. We are here to impartially report, unpack, and analyze the arguments and the raw facts exactly as they are presented in the provided data.
That's a crucial distinction. We're dissecting the mechanics of the crisis, not the morality of the actors involved.
Well said.
And to do that logically, we really need a roadmap. You can think of this as a chain reaction.
Okay, where do we start?
We're going to start at the geographic epicenter, the literal, physical blockade in the Middle East that triggered this whole cascade.
The anatomy of the choke point.
Exactly. And from there, we'll trace the immediate financial contagion. We'll look at the actual mechanism of how millions of trapped barrels of oil directly translate into soaring mortgage rates and massive tech layoffs in the West.
Because they are directly connected.
They absolutely are. Then we'll examine the looming secondary crisis, the one moving silently through natural gas, fertilizer, and the global food supply.
That's the part that really scared me.
Yeah, it's grim. And finally, we will untangle the geopolitical chess match happening behind the scenes as the world's superpowers exploit this chaos for leverage.
Okay. To set the tone for exactly what kind of psychological whiplash the markets are experiencing right now, one of the European energy analysts used a brilliant, if slightly morbid, analogy.
Oh, right, the movie reference.
Yeah. They compared the current global energy market to the Norwegian zombie horror film Dead Snow. Have you seen it?
I haven't, actually. But the brief in the source material paints a very vivid, very grim picture.
It is perfectly accurate for what we're seeing in the data. So In the movie, it starts off perfectly fine. A group of friends goes on a nice, relaxing vacation to an isolated, picturesque ski hut.
Sounds lovely.
Right. The sun is shining, they've got hot cocoa, everything is great. And then suddenly, the temperature drops, they are plagued by extreme cold, and out of absolutely nowhere,
Zombies.
a division of undead SS soldiers armed with chainsaws emerges from the snow. Obviously. But the point is, the movie goes from a relaxed vacation to a desperate, violent fight for survival in a matter of minutes.
Which is exactly what happened to the market.
Right. According to the macroeconomic analysis we have, that is precisely the psychological shift that just hit the global energy market.
Because for the last decade, we were basically coasting.
We were on vacation.
Energy was relatively cheap, supply chains were invisible and seamless, and suddenly the chainsaws are out.
The chainsaws are definitely out, which is the perfect entry point for the first stage of our analysis.
Let's look at the chainsaws.
Yeah, let's look at the physical choke point itself, because all of this global financial panic originates from a very specific geographic bottleneck. It's causing the entire global engine to seize up.
And to understand it, we really have to unpack the sheer volume of this disruption. Because the numbers they're just hard to wrap your head around.
We have to talk about the missing millions. The global economy, I mean, every truck, every cargo ship, every factory, every flight, it consumes roughly 104 million barrels of oil per day.
104 million.
Yeah.
Every single day.
That number is the baseline heartbeat of human commerce.
And it's a very finely tuned heartbeat, too. Like, production and consumption globally generally hover right around that 104 million mark.
There isn't a massive amount of excess capacity just sitting around in giant vats waiting to be used.
No, it's a delicate, just-in-time equilibrium.
But right now, because of the active blockade in the Persian Gulf, the data shows that a staggering 15 to 16 million barrels of crude and refined products are suddenly just
Gone.
Erased from the daily global supply. You are talking about roughly 15% of the world's daily energy intake completely vanishing overnight.
To understand the mechanics of why it vanished so completely and so quickly, we have to look at the geographic reality of the Strait of Hormuz.
Okay, paint a picture for us.
Well, when you look at a map, the strait itself is about 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point.
Which is what, like 21 miles?
Roughly 21 miles.
Yeah.
Now, to a layperson, 21 miles sounds like a fair amount of space to maneuver a ship.
Right, you'd think you could just sail closer to one coast or the other, just hug the shoreline.
But you can't.
Yeah.
The actual navigable channel, the deep water that is absolutely required for these massive, fully loaded supertankers to pass through without running aground, is much, much narrower.
How narrow?
It basically consists of two lanes, each only about 2 miles wide, separated by a 2-mile buffer.
Oh, wow.
It is an incredibly tight squeeze for ships that are sometimes a quarter-mile long and take literal miles to come to a complete stop.
So it's not a wide open lake, it's more like a massive global highway squeezed into a single-lane dirt road.
Exactly. And the specific mechanism Iran is using to close this road is what makes it so terrifying.
The naval mines.
Right. The sources point out that Iran has an estimated stockpile of 5,000 naval mines. And they aren't using massive radar-visible destroyers to deploy them.
Yeah, the deployment method is entirely asymmetrical.
They use small, agile, fast-attack boats.
Speedboats, basically.
Yeah, vessels that barely register on radar, sometimes carrying just 3 to 5 mines at a time, creeping out under the cover of darkness.
And the terrifying logistical reality highlighted in the analysis is that it only takes about 10 strategically placed mines in that narrow deep-water channel to completely paralyze the route.
Which sounds crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me stop you there, because this is where I think people get really confused. 10 mines.
Yeah.
The U.S. Navy has the most advanced sonar and countermeasures in the world. Why do 10 naval mines, which is technology that essentially hasn't changed much since World War II, shut down 15 million barrels of oil?
Because you aren't fighting the mines directly. You're fighting the mechanism of maritime insurance, which is the actual invisible force that governs global shipping. Think about it. A supertanker carries hundreds of millions of dollars worth of oil.
Right.
If even 10 mines are dropped into the strait, the actuary models at Lloyd's of London and other major marine insurers instantly break.
They just flash red. The risk of a catastrophic loss goes from a fractional percentage to a highly probable event. Instantly, the insurers either completely revoke coverage for any vessel entering the Persian Gulf, or they quote a risk premium that is so exorbitantly high It entirely wipes out the profit margin of the cargo.
Wow. So if the ship isn't insured, the shipping company just won't risk the multi-million-dollar vessel.
Exactly. And even if they did, the crews, the actual human beings operating the ships, will simply refuse to sail into an active minefield.
I mean, I would.
Right. So the physical mines create a financial barrier that is completely impenetrable.
And here's where the timeline illusion, as the European analysts call it, really comes into play.
The political rhetoric versus reality.
Yes, because if you listen to the political rhetoric specifically, the sources note former U.S. President Donald Trump's public claim that he could end this entire situation in 4 weeks. You might think this is a short-term blip.
A temporary standoff.
Right, but the experts writing these reports violently disagree with that assessment. Both the macroeconomic commentary and the geopolitical analysis state that clearing this choke point is going to take months, if not years.
The disparity between the political rhetoric and the physical, operational reality is massive. Let's look at the actual mechanics of minesweeping.
It's not fast.
No, you cannot just wave a magic wand or fly a jet over it. If an allied naval coalition manages to locate and safely detonate 10 mines in that channel, it takes a tremendous amount of time.
You have to use specialized sonar arrays, deploy remote underwater vehicles,
And slowly clear, grid by grid. It is painstaking, incredibly dangerous work. And here is the fatal flaw in the quick resolution theory.
What's that?
As soon as the Navy clears those 10 mines and declares a lane safe, a single Iranian fast boat can zip out the next night and drop 10 more right back into the exact same channel.
Oh my God, it's the ultimate lethal game of whack-a-mole.
Exactly. Furthermore, you have to factor in the psychology of the adversary. From a strategic standpoint, the analysis notes that Iran views this as an existential fight.
The survival of the Revolutionary Guard?
And by extension, the regime itself. Yeah, it's all on the line, which means they have absolutely no incentive to back down or compromise.
They will use every resource they have.
Even if they're slowly bleeding out economically, they'll maintain this blockade. Because surrendering the blockade means surrendering their only leverage.
And yet, amidst all this chaos, there is one detail in the sources that absolutely blew my mind. There's one place that is bizarrely, almost surgically untouched by the conflict.
Karg Island.
Yes, the Geopolitical brief highlights this critical, tiny piece of geography called Karg Island. It's an island in the Persian Gulf, roughly 20 kilometers by 4 kilometers.
It is basically just one giant floating oil terminal.
Exactly. It is the absolute beating heart of the Iranian oil economy.
To put it in perspective, Karg Island handles roughly 95% of all of Iran's onshore oil exports.
95%.
All the pipelines from the mainland converge on this one tiny island to be loaded onto international tankers.
But here's what's crazy to me. Currently, according to the data, both the U.S. and Israel are completely avoiding hitting it.
They haven't touched it.
They haven't bombed the pipelines, they haven't cratered the loading docks, and honestly, I struggled with this when I read it.
It seems counterintuitive.
Right. If you are in an existential proxy war with Iran and they are choking off the global economy, why on earth would you intentionally leave their economic heart beating?
Because military strategy has to account for the day-after scenario.
Okay, explain that.
The analysis suggests that avoiding Karg Island is a highly calculated long-term move. Think about it mechanically. If you destroy Karg Island, you are essentially declaring total unrestricted war.
Which escalates the conflict beyond any chance of diplomatic containment.
Right. But more importantly, let's say the current regime collapses. If there is ever to be a regime change or a different moderate future for Iran, whoever takes over will desperately need an economic foundation to rebuild the country.
They need something to sell to keep the country from collapsing into total anarchy.
Precisely. If you obliterate Karg Island, you don't just punish the current ayatollahs, you permanently cripple the geography.
It would take decades and hundreds of billions of dollars to rebuild that specific export infrastructure.
You would be guaranteeing that a post-regime Iran remains a failed, impoverished state, which just breeds further extremism. So they leave the island intact, targeting military sites instead of the economic lifeblood.
Okay, I follow the logic there, but let's bring it back to the missing 15 million barrels, because I have a big question here.
Sure.
If the global economy is like a massive highway, and someone just dropped concrete barricades across all the lanes at the Strait of Hormuz, why aren't we seeing absolute chaos right now? If 15% of the world's oil is just gone, why aren't there lines wrapping around the block at gas stations in London and New York? Why hasn't society immediately collapsed into a dystopian wasteland?
That is the million-dollar question. And the answer lies in understanding the mechanics of what the experts call the buffer.
The buffer.
Right. The global energy system isn't completely rigid. It has shock absorbers built into it. However, the data makes it clear that those shock absorbers are currently being stress tested to their absolute breaking point.
So they're working, but barely.
Exactly. First, we have to look at China.
Right. The sources explicitly detail how China has been acting behind the scenes.
China has secretly built an incredibly robust strategic petroleum reserve. While the West was focused elsewhere, the data reveals that China currently holds enough reserves to last roughly 120 days.
120 days of total supply.
Yeah. In fact, if you look at the shipping manifests from January and February, right before this blockade truly escalated, China was quietly buying up 15% more Middle Eastern oil than their usual consumption rate.
Wait, so they saw the storm coming and decided to hoard all the umbrellas before it started raining?
That is exactly what they did. They read the geopolitical tea leaves and stockpiled. Very. Secondly, the market dynamics pre-conflict provided a slight cushion. Before the blockade, the global market was actually in a state of slight overproduction.
Countries were pumping slightly more than the 104 million barrels we were consuming.
Which created a bit of slack in the system.
Mm-hmm.
But the third, and perhaps the most ironic buffer of all, is Russia.
Oh, man. This is the part of the analysis that feels completely paradoxical.
It does, but mathematically, it's what is saving the system right now. The Russian shadow fleet.
Explain the shadow fleet.
These are the hundreds of aging tankers operating completely outside of Western sanctions. They're turning off their transponders, spoofing their GPS locations.
Basically going dark.
Right. And they have been steadily pumping massive amounts of illicit oil into the global market, particularly to buyers in Asia. That off-the-books oil is currently one of the main factors keeping the entire global system from an immediate, catastrophic supply collapse.
It's incredible. The illicit, sanctioned oil is the only thing keeping the lights on.
It's a massive geopolitical nightmare.
Which we will definitely dig into later. But right now, we need to transition.
Because the pain is spreading.
Exactly. Because those physically trapped barrels of oil in the Middle East don't just stay in the Middle East. We need to follow the impact of that shortage as it bleeds directly into the global financial system.
The financial contagion.
Let's talk about how a mine in the Strait of Hormuz directly translates into a threat to your wallet, your mortgage, and your job security.
This is where the physical reality of energy meets the abstraction of global finance.
Because energy is the master commodity.
Yes. Every other price in the world is derived from the cost of energy. When that foundation shakes, the results are explosive.
Let's track the price trajectory, because the price of a barrel of crude is the most immediate panic indicator.
The thermostat of the global economy.
Right. As soon as the blockade solidified, oil prices surged straight to $100 a barrel. But according to the macroeconomic commentary, that is just the beginning.
They're projecting much higher.
Their worst-case models point to oil stabilizing at $150 or even $175 a barrel. And the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, they are actively using the media to threaten pushing it to $200 a barrel.
And we have to explain why $200 a barrel is such a terrifying number. It isn't just about paying more to fill up your car.
No, it breaks everything.
At $200 a barrel, the fundamental math of the modern world breaks down. Airlines can no longer afford jet fuel, so flights are grounded. Container ships cost too much to operate, so global trade grinds to a halt.
Even farming. The cost of running a tractor to harvest wheat becomes more expensive than the wheat itself.
Exactly. It breaks the supply chain at the molecular level. And it introduces what the financial experts in our sources call the dreaded S word.
Stagflation.
Stagflation is arguably the most toxic economic condition a country can face, and central bankers are absolutely terrified of it.
Why is it worse than regular inflation?
Well, to understand why, you have to look at the mechanics of normal inflation. Usually inflation happens when an economy is running too hot. People have lots of money, they're buying lots of goods, and demand drives prices up.
And central banks fix this by raising interest rates to cool the economy down.
Right. But stagflation is different. It's stagnant economic growth, meaning businesses are shutting down, jobs are being lost, combined with violently high inflation.
And in this case, the inflation isn't driven by consumer demand.
No, it's driven by the underlying, unavoidable cost of energy.
You can't just choose not to use energy. The sources cite a forecast from Rabobank, which is a massive Dutch financial institution, predicting that this energy shock could cause inflation to surge up to 3.1% in their long-term scenario.
And our experts noted that Rabobank's worst-case scenario is quickly becoming our baseline reality.
But let's ground this massive macroeconomic concept in immediate reality. How does stagflation hit the listener? Look at the housing market in the UK.
Oh, the mortgage shock.
The sources detail a completely unprecedented event. Within a single week, 500 mortgage products were suddenly pulled from the market.
And we need to explain the banking mechanics of why that happens. Because it's not arbitrary.
Walk us through it.
When a bank offers you a 2-year or 5-year fixed-rate mortgage, they are making a bet on what inflation and interest rates will do over that time period. They might offer you a 4% rate, betting that their borrowing costs will stay around 2%.
Makes sense.
But when the energy shock hits, inflation spikes. The central banks signal that they have to raise base interest rates to 5% or 6% to fight the inflation. Suddenly, the bank realizes that if they give you a mortgage at 4%, they are going to lose money on every single payment you make.
So they panic. They don't just raise the rates. They literally pull the digital plug on the products overnight.
The lenders look at the risk models, the models flash red, and they take the mortgages off the shelf.
Now, those 2-year and 5-year fixed rates are soaring past 5% and heading higher. This is devastating because for the last year, experts and economists had been promising everyone that rates would drop through 2028.
People plan their lives around that?
They calculated their family budgets, they bought homes based on those projected falling rates.
What you are describing with those pulled mortgages is a symptom of severe institutional panic. The banks are realizing the models they use to predict the future are fundamentally broken.
And we see this mirrored exactly on Wall Street.
Oh, absolutely. The macroeconomic source highlights several incredibly alarming signals from the deepest posts of the financial sector. For instance, JP Morgan has actively restricted private credit lending.
Let's define that. What is private credit lending and why does JP Morgan restricting it matter?
Private credit is essentially direct lending from financial institutions to medium and large businesses outside of the traditional bond market or public bank loans. It's the grease that keeps corporate operations running. When JP Morgan restricts that lending, they are essentially saying, we no longer trust that businesses can survive the upcoming energy costs, so we are cutting off their access to cash.
Wow. Furthermore, the sources note Morgan Stanley has blocked fund redemptions, actively marking down the value of their loan portfolios.
And that's huge.
Explain the fund redemptions. That sounds like jargon, but it's actually a huge red flag.
That's a massive red flag. A fund redemption is when an investor asks to take their money out of an investment fund. Usually the fund just sells some assets and gives you your cash.
Easy enough.
But if Morgan Stanley blocks redemptions, it means the underlying assets in that fund-likely corporate loans are suddenly worth far less than they thought, or they are entirely illiquid.
They can't sell them without taking a massive loss.
Right, so they trap the investor's money inside the fund to prevent a collapse. It's a liquidity freeze.
And the final piece of this panic is the default rate. According to Fitch ratings cited in the report, private credit defaults have hit an all-time high of 9.2%.
Let's translate that percentage. 9.2% defaults means nearly 1 in 10 massive multi-million-dollar corporate loans is actively failing. The businesses cannot pay the debt back.
Precisely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the analysts argue that this is a perfect, terrifying recreation of the 1970s oil crisis playbook.
When energy costs spike this aggressively, it doesn't just hurt the oil companies. It acts as a massive, completely unavoidable tax on every single business in the world.
The source specifically points out that consumer cyclical stocks get completely decimated.
Cyclical stocks being companies that rely on consumers having extra disposable income.
Like travel, luxury goods, restaurants.
Exactly. When average people are spending all their money just trying to fuel their cars and heat their homes, they stop buying new TVs and going on vacation. The revenues for those cyclical companies collapse.
The financial institutions see this cascade of defaults coming, so they restrict lending.
Which starves the businesses of the cash they desperately need to survive the shock. It's a vicious, self-fulfilling downward spiral.
And that downward spiral leads directly to the human cost, what our source bluntly calls the white-collar wipeout.
The labor market.
Yes, we are pivoting to the labor market now, and the numbers in the data are brutal. We are seeing massive tech layoffs sweeping across the industry,
Oracle is reportedly cutting 20,000 to 30,000 jobs.
with internal rumors suggesting it could eventually go as high as 45,000. Amazon has confirmed 16,000 cuts specifically for their tech workers.
We aren't talking about warehouse staff being replaced by robots here. These are software engineers and project managers.
And whispers push that Amazon number closer to 28,000.
These are historically secure, high-paying, knowledge work jobs evaporating essentially overnight.
Right. But I want to push back on the pure energy crisis narrative here for a second, because the macroeconomic source hints at something much deeper.
Okay, I'm listening.
Let me pose a question to you. Are these tech layoffs strictly happening because the energy input costs are crushing consumer demand, forcing companies to simply trim the fat? Or is this massive geopolitical energy crisis providing the absolute perfect smokescreen for these massive corporations to quietly replace knowledge workers with artificial intelligence?
It's a fantastic question, and the synthesis of the data suggests it is absolutely both.
Really?
Yes. The energy crisis provides the immediate financial necessity and the public justification to cut costs. The executives can stand up at a shareholder meeting and blame the Middle East.
But artificial intelligence provides the actual mechanism to do so permanently.
Exactly. The source explores this through the lens of a socio-economic theory called the fourth turning cycle.
Okay, let's break down the fourth turning. What does that actually mean in this context?
The fourth turning theory suggests that history moves in cycles, and we are currently entering a period of deep, systemic institutional upheaval. The argument presented in the macroeconomic commentary is that traditional 9-to-5 knowledge work, the idea of sitting at a desk, processing data for a massive corporation for 40 years, is fundamentally collapsing.
So these tech jobs aren't just being temporarily paused until the economy recovers?
No, they're being permanently deleted by automation and AI. The corporate structure realized during this energy squeeze that an AI model doesn't require health insurance, it doesn't need heating in an office building, and it doesn't commute.
So the comfortable middle-class desk job is basically going the way of the horse and buggy or the elevator operator.
According to the stark assessment of this source, yes. And they argue that surviving this incoming economic storm requires an urgent, fundamental shift in how individuals view employment.
They strongly advocate for building independent digital income streams.
Basically becoming a mercenary in the digital economy.
Essentially, yes. The concept is uncoupling your personal survival from a massive corporate structure that is heavily exposed to these global macro shocks.
The assertion is that relying on a single corporate paycheck, in a world where geopolitical energy crises and AI are simultaneously disrupting the very foundation of the economy, is an incredibly risky bet.
So the takeaway is that to survive, you have to become economically autonomous.
Right.
But that begs an even more terrifying question. How autonomous can you really be when the literal electrical grid is under threat?
That brings us to our third area of analysis.
We are moving away from the direct impacts of oil and finance, and we are looking at the silent secondary crises that are currently brewing in natural gas and the global food supply.
This is where the sheer interconnectedness of global supply chains becomes truly frightening. It's not just about the price of gasoline in your car, it's about the very raw materials that sustain modern biological life.
Let's start with the natural gas situation, specifically the LNG bidding war. So, if we look back at the European geopolitical data, Europe thought they had executed this brilliant strategic maneuver a few years ago.
After the initial crisis with Russia in 2022.
Yes, Europe largely switched away from relying on Russian pipeline gas. They pivoted hard to liquid natural gas, or LNG, primarily sourcing it via massive ships from the United States and Qatar.
The European politicians patted themselves on the back and thought, great, we've secured our energy independence, we are safe from pipeline blackmail.
But the sources reveal a massive structural catch in that plan. Let's look at the actual physics of LNG.
It's not as simple as just putting gas in a pipe.
No. To ship natural gas across an ocean, you have to run it through a massive multi-billion-dollar industrial facility called an LNG train.
It's not a locomotive.
Right. It's a colossal liquefaction plant that supercools the gas down to negative 260 degrees Fahrenheit, shrinking it so it fits on a ship.
And Qatar was supposed to bring numerous new LNG trains online in the second half of this year to supply Europe.
But the data shows those mega projects are severely delayed. They likely won't be fully operational until next year at the earliest.
So the supply isn't there. And here is the terrifying part of the geopolitical equation. Asia is watching the Middle East blockade with absolute horror.
Because Asian economies like Japan, South Korea, and China are heavily reliant on imported energy to survive.
So what are they doing? They are aggressively entering the spot market.
And we should clarify the spot market. In energy, you have long-term contracts where you agree to buy gas for 10 years at a set price.
And then you have the spot market, which is essentially the global open auction for any uncontracted gas that is available right now today.
Exactly. And a terrified Asia is currently buying up all the short-term spot market gas from the United States. They are literally outbidding Europe for the exact gas that Europe assumed would keep their citizens warm this winter.
Asia is paying a premium, and the ships are turning toward the Pacific instead of the Atlantic.
Which leads us to the analogy our European experts use to describe the policy response: the musical chairs of European energy grids.
It is a brilliant way to highlight a profound lack of physical reality in European energy planning.
Walk us through how that paper strategy actually works, or I guess fails to work.
Well, when European leaders are asked in press conferences how they will survive an energy shortfall if the LNG ships don't arrive, they constantly rely on a paper-based strategy. It's an interconnected grid issue.
Right.
The UK government will say, well, if we run short, we have interconnectors. We will just ask France to transmit energy to us.
But France is looking at their own deficit.
Exactly. So France says, we will just ask the Netherlands to send us gas. And the Netherlands says, we will pull from Germany.
They are passing a completely empty parcel around the continent.
Exactly. They are relying on their neighbors' reserves, completely ignoring the fundamental physical reality that if you trace the grid back to the source, there is no underlying physical supply entering the system.
Every country is counting on importing from a neighbor who is also counting on importing.
The music is going to stop, and there are mathematically not enough chairs. And we know this isn't just theory, because the data on gas reserves is dangerously low.
The macroeconomic source notes that some national reserves were not actively refilled when they dropped below 30%.
And our European experts cited a highly concerning report from Gasunie, the Dutch natural gas infrastructure company, back in February, showing reserves had dropped below 10% before they scrambled to address it.
And here's where this narrative gets really interesting and honestly much darker. Let's connect this natural gas shortage directly to the grocery store aisle.
The food supply.
Yes. Most people think of natural gas just for heating a stove or generating electricity, but it is a primary, completely irreplaceable ingredient in manufacturing fertilizer.
Specifically through the Haber-Bosch process, which is the industrial method used to synthesize ammonia. You literally cannot make modern commercial fertilizer without massive quantities of natural gas. It is the raw feedstock.
Right, so the sources explicitly point out that when you have a natural gas shortage or even just a massive price spike because Asia is outbidding Europe, you immediately trigger a massive spike in the cost of producing fertilizer.
And when fertilizer becomes exorbitantly expensive, the farmers have to pay more to grow the exact same crop.
That cost inflates global food prices directly and violently.
We saw this exact brutal mechanism during the onset of the Ukraine conflict, where initial gas restrictions immediately hit the fertilizer market. The cost of growing a field of wheat or corn skyrockets, and the farmers have no choice but to pass those costs directly down the supply chain.
So the next time you are at the grocery store wondering why a basic loaf of bread costs $2 more, you can trace that exact price hike back through the supply chain to a natural gas deficit caused by a naval mine in the Persian Gulf.
For developing nations, this quickly moves from an annoying inflation problem to a genuine catastrophic food security crisis.
So, knowing all this, governments are under immense pressure to lower prices. And the immediate political lever they pull is releasing emergency energy reserves.
Which is dangerous.
Right. The macroeconomic source explicitly calls this a recipe for disaster. Let me float an analogy here. Is releasing the strategic petroleum and gas reserves right now basically like a farmer deciding to eat his seed corn in the middle of winter?
Eating the seed corn, yeah.
Because it feels great today because you aren't hungry right now, but you absolutely guarantee that you will starve tomorrow when planting season arrives because you have nothing left to put in the ground.
That is a functionally perfect analogy for the mechanism at play. Strategic emergency reserves are designed for temporary, easily definable, short-term physical shocks.
That's a natural disaster.
Exactly. For example, a Category 5 hurricane takes out a cluster of refineries in the Gulf of Mexico for 2 months. You release the reserves to bridge the gap until the refineries are fixed. They are fundamentally not designed to subsidize a global, multi-year structural deficit caused by geopolitical war.
Because if you release them now, you just artificially suppress the price.
Exactly. If the government floods the market with reserve oil, the price drops. But that artificial drop removes the vital financial incentive for the free market to conserve energy.
People keep driving, factories keep running at full capacity because the price feels normal.
Meanwhile, you are rapidly depleting the exact physical buffer you will desperately need when the actual severe winter arrives and the global supply lines completely sever. You are eating the seed corn.
And it goes even beyond energy and food. The blockade isn't just trapping fuel. What else is stuck behind those naval mines?
This is the detail that often gets overlooked in the headlines. It's not just oil and gas trapped in the Persian Gulf. The region exports massive, globally significant quantities of critical raw materials.
Like what?
The sources specifically mention commodities like sulfur and aluminum,
Why do those matter so much?
because they are foundational elements for modern global manufacturing. Sulfur is used in everything from rubber production for tires to manufacturing sulfuric acid, which is used in almost every industrial process.
And aluminum.
Aluminum is obviously critical.
Yeah.
If you suddenly cut off the supply of Middle Eastern aluminum, automotive manufacturing in Germany slows down, aerospace production in the U.S. stalls, commercial construction worldwide takes a massive hit.
It's all connected.
The lack of these raw materials acts as an invisible hand, reaching out of the Middle East and causing further silent industrial paralysis across the globe.
We have basically painted a picture of a massive, complex global machine where someone has simultaneously cut the fuel line, drained the oil, and started actively unbolting the structural framing.
It's a grim picture.
Which brings us to our final area of analysis, the geopolitical chessboard. As the global economic system seizes up, the world's superpowers are not just passively watching this happen. They are actively, aggressively exploiting this chaos for their own strategic gain.
Crisis creates opportunity, as the saying goes. And the geopolitical landscape is shifting violently to capitalize on Western financial and physical vulnerabilities.
Desperation creates incredible geopolitical leverage.
It really does. Let's look at Russia's massive windfall in this scenario.
Yes, the sources detail a genuinely shocking development regarding sanctions. Former U.S. President Trump, according to the geopolitical analysis, granted exceptions to the Russian shadow fleet, as well as the legal G7 shipping fleet, allowing them to sell their oil above the previously established price cap.
We need to explain how that price cap was supposed to work originally.
Right.
The G7 nations tried to punish Russia by saying, we control the global maritime insurance market. We will only insure ships carrying Russian oil if the oil is sold below $60 a barrel.
It was designed to keep Russian oil flowing to prevent a global shortage, but starve Putin of the massive profits.
But because the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, and the market is absolutely desperate for any oil it can get its hands on to offset the missing 15 million Middle Eastern barrels, that cap is essentially being waived.
The illicit Russian oil is no longer just tolerated, it's being actively welcomed by the global market.
And the financial math on that exception is staggering. By being allowed to sell their oil at these newly elevated, non-capped market prices, the experts analyzing the data calculate that this dynamic is adding roughly $1 billion a month directly to Vladimir Putin's war chest.
$1 billion a month in pure, unexpected profit. And that leads directly to the Ukraine connection in the sources.
Prussia is brilliantly capitalizing on the fact that the West is completely distracted, politically paralyzed, and financially stretched to the breaking point by the Middle East blockade.
According to the intelligence detailed in the sources, Russia is actually receiving specific tactical targeting information from Iran.
They are then using that shared intelligence to launch highly coordinated, deeply complex combinations of drones and advanced ballistic missiles at the Ukrainian capital, Kiev.
What's fascinating and terrifying here is the tactical design of these strikes. If you look at the military analysis, these aren't just random terror bombings designed to hit buildings.
No, they are mathematically calculated to exhaust the specific defensive capabilities of Western-supplied Patriot missile systems.
Walk us through the mechanics of that. How do you mathematically exhaust a missile system?
It's about cost asymmetry and swarm tactics. Russia will send a massive swarm of relatively cheap Iranian Shahed drones, maybe costing $20,000 each.
Okay.
The Patriot radar system detects them, and the automated defense protocols force the Patriot batteries to fire their highly expensive, incredibly limited supply of interceptor missiles, which can cost up to $4 million each.
Wow. So a $20,000 drone forces a $4 million missile.
Exactly. Russia forces Ukraine to spend millions to shoot down thousands of dollars worth of drones. And once the Patriot magazines are physically empty, Russia launches the heavier, devastating hypersonic ballistic missiles, which can now break through the undefended airspace.
It is a calculated strategy of attrition, and with the West entirely distracted by the energy shock and inflation at home, manufacturing and replacing those multi-million-dollar Patriot missiles for Ukraine becomes increasingly difficult.
But the West isn't entirely passive in this scenario, which brings up a terrifying escalation point.
We have to talk about poking the bear. Our macroeconomic source brings up an alarming, highly specific detail. The UK recently helped Ukraine fire British-made Storm Shadow cruise missiles directly into a Russian city.
The diplomatic and military fallout from that action was immediate and severe. The Kremlin officially labeled this a terrorist attack, specifically noting in international channels that civilians were killed.
But more concerning for global stability was the explicit public warning from Moscow that they will not forget Britain's role in this strike.
The macroeconomic source views this action as an incredibly dangerous provocation. They describe it literally as poking a bear.
The underlying logic is that Russia is a collapsing empire, which makes it incredibly volatile. The source argues that by authorizing these strikes, Western leaders are putting the safety of their own citizens last in pursuit of abstract geopolitical goals, risking a direct nuclear-armed confrontation while the West is already economically crippled by the Middle East blockade.
It's an absolute powder keg.
Yep.
You have desperate actors on all sides making moves that assume the other side will back down, which is a historically disastrous assumption.
And while Europe and Russia are locked in that existential struggle, let's pivot and look at the Asian theater. Because according to the data, China is playing an absolute masterclass in opportunistic diplomacy.
China officially, publicly condemned Iran's attacks on the Gulf states.
Why? Well, as we discussed with their 120-day buffer, China relies heavily on Middle Eastern oil. They actually need the region to be stable for their own economic growth.
But simultaneously, while playing the responsible peacemaker in the Middle East, China aggressively and quietly halted exports of critical jet fuel to Australia.
This is a textbook, almost surgical example of geopolitical leverage. China knows exactly where the structural vulnerabilities of Western-aligned nations lie.
The sources point out a startling statistic. Australia imports roughly 70% of its jet fuel. They don't refine it domestically.
By simply cutting off that export supply, China instantly puts a chokehold on Australian aviation, military readiness, and national logistics without firing a single shot.
And the source ties this Australian vulnerability directly to a much broader, much more controversial critique of Western energy policy, a concept they term green regrets.
They argue that Western nations, explicitly naming Germany and Australia in the data, committed what they bluntly term economic suicide.
That is a very strong phrase.
Yeah.
How do they justify that assessment?
The argument is that these nations rushed headlong into green energy transitions without securing reliable baseline power first. The mechanics of it are fascinating. By enthusiastically dismantling their nuclear power plants and prematurely shutting down their fossil fuel baseload generation, they remove their own internal energy independence.
Right.
And because solar and wind alone couldn't handle the industrial load, they left themselves totally, fundamentally reliant on fragile international trade deals with China. They rely on China for both the physical components to build the green grid-like solar panels and battery minerals, and for refined fuels like the jet fuel Australia needs.
This raises an incredibly important philosophical question about the nature of national security in the 21st century. The critique in the source suggests that environmental policy, when executed without rigorous geopolitical pragmatism, ceases to be about saving the planet and becomes a massive national security vulnerability.
Take Germany as the prime example.
Shutting down their highly efficient nuclear plants was an environmental victory for some, but physically, it forced them to rely heavily on cheap Russian pipeline gas. When that was cut off, they had to pivot to relying on Chinese industrial cooperation.
The fragility wasn't an accident. It was built into the system by design because they assumed globalization would never fail.
Speaking of globalization failing, I have to ask about the major players sitting right in the middle of the blast radius, Saudi Arabia and the wealthy Gulf states.
They are geographically right next door to Iran.
They have massive, highly funded militaries equipped with the best American hardware. Why don't they just fight back against Iran to open the strait?
Because they're trapped in a purely defensive, highly vulnerable posture. The Saudi leadership understands the geography better than anyone. They know that initiating a full-scale regional war with Iran would inevitably lead to the destruction of their own energy infrastructure.
Their refineries, their desalination plants.
And that infrastructure is their sole source of national wealth. So instead of fighting a war they can't afford to win, they are trying to engineer a way to physically bypass the problem.
Right. The data mentions the East-West pipeline. How does that work?
Saudi Arabia has been desperately trying to route their oil completely around the blocked Strait of Hormuz. They have a massive piece of infrastructure called the East-West pipeline, which runs horizontally across the entire Arabian Peninsula, taking oil from the eastern oil fields directly to the Red Sea on the west coast.
And that pipeline has massive capacity. Right. It can move a lot of oil.
It is significant. It can transport up to 7 million barrels a day. However, they face a massive, insurmountable logistical bottleneck.
Which is?
Once the oil successfully travels through the pipeline and reaches the Red Sea coast, it doesn't just magically teleport to Europe. It has to be offloaded from the pipeline into massive coastal storage tanks and then loaded onto tankers.
But the Red Sea is currently an active, highly lethal war zone due to the Houthi rebel attacks on international shipping.
So they bypass one blockade just to deliver the oil directly into a missile range.
Exactly. So Saudi Arabia can get millions of barrels of oil to their western coast, but the maritime insurance rates in the Red Sea are astronomical, and the physical risk of a tanker being hit by a Houthi anti-ship missile is incredibly high.
They can't safely get the oil onto the boats and out to the global market. They are geographically and militarily boxed in.
Okay, let's take a deep breath. We have covered a massive amount of incredibly complex ground today.
If we pull back from the tactical details and connect all of this to the bigger picture, the narrative is undeniably clear. We are currently witnessing a singular, incredibly vulnerable geographic choke point, a 33-kilometer strip of water in the Middle East laced with naval mines, triggering a simultaneous, catastrophic global financial, agricultural, and geopolitical meltdown.
The era of taking cheap energy, low mortgage rates, and seamless, invisible global supply chains for granted is definitively, permanently over.
The foundational assumptions of the modern global economy, the absolute belief that goods, raw materials, and energy will always flow freely across the oceans without interruption, have been fundamentally shattered by this event.
And this brings the entire analysis directly back to you, listening right now. Because when we spend an hour talking about massive macroeconomic concepts like LNG trains, sovereign debt defaults, and ballistic missile attrition, it can feel very academic.
It can feel distant.
But this isn't just an abstract theory about massive tankers stuck in the Persian Gulf or politicians arguing in European parliaments. This geopolitical choke point is exactly why the interest rate on your specific mortgage just spiked out of nowhere.
It's the exact reason why the cost of your groceries, your bread, your vegetables is quietly but aggressively inflating every single week.
It is the underlying hidden reason why secure white-collar tech jobs are vanishing by the tens of thousands, forcing an entirely new, potentially terrifying survival strategy in an AI-driven digital economy.
You are not separated from this. You are living inside the consequences of this specific choke point every single day.
The physical reality of the world, the raw geography, the oil, the gas, the minerals, is violently reasserting itself over the comfortable financial abstractions we've all gotten so used to living in.
Which leaves us with a final, slightly haunting question to ponder as we wrap up. We started this deep dive by talking about that medical x-ray machine.
Right.
We talked about how comforting it is to clearly see the broken bones, to have a diagnosis, to know exactly how the system is broken so you can fix it. Well, if this single naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz proves that the entire concept of globalized, secure energy is just a fragile illusion, what happens when nations fully wake up to that fact?
What happens when governments realize that the only true guaranteed security is complete, isolated self-reliance?
Are we currently watching the painful death of the global economy as we know it? And are we witnessing the birth of a fiercely walled-off, hyper-localized world where your physical zip code literally determines whether or not you have access to electricity and affordable food?
It's a genuinely chilling thought, and it entirely shifts how we must view the geopolitical future of the next decade.
It really does. Like the unfortunate skiers in dead snow, the comfortable vacation of the last 30 years is definitely over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Keep questioning the headlines, keep looking for the underlying mechanics, and we'll see you next time.